Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. Today, I'm joined by Mike McDerment. He's the co-founder and CEO over at FreshBooks. Mike, welcome to the show. How's it going today, sir?
Hey, Logan. Thank you. It is going in these COVID times. I'm going from one chair in my home to another chair and not much further. Yeah.
Musical chairs. We got to do some things to keep the blood flowing, keep that kind of change of pace and scenery a little bit going. I've been talking to some of our customers that have, brought in a sun lamp into their home office to get some vitamin D, get some exposure there, right? Change things up a little bit.
That is a very good idea. I was just looking, you look a lot less pale than I do. So yes, I was thinking about vitamin D just moments ago. Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Mike, our conversation today is going to be about 7 ways that you almost killed FreshBooks, or 7 pitfalls that founders and CEOs want to avoid as they're scaling up. Before we get into that, little bit of context for today's conversation. Give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the FreshBooks team are up to these days.
Yeah, so I'm a founding CEO of a sort of large and growing software platform. So my story is I started out, I was running a small agency using Word and Excel to bill my clients. I accidentally saved over an invoice, said there's got to be a better way, and started building a piece of software. That was over a decade ago. Since we started, over 20 million people have used our software. We have paying customers in over 100 countries. And the way to think about what we are, it's just a ridiculously easy to use invoicing and accounting software. So we don't really serve like restaurants and retail businesses. We serve really knowledge-based businesses, a lot of creative professionals, lawyers, IT folks, marketers, those kinds of people. Yeah, and by virtue of focusing on segments that have those similar kinds of needs across there, the product's really simple and easy to use. So we're number 2 in America for small business accounting software. I guess that's the other notable item. So that's a bit of background. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I head up sales for our agency here at Sweetfish, I love the line that nothing happens until someone sells something. I've said that before in my sales career, but I was talking with our COO as we were kind of going through our invoicing and collections and all these sorts of things that are, less fun for salespeople to think about. I was like, maybe I need to revise that previous statement. Nothing happens until someone pays something. So good that you guys are doing great work to enable that on the back end for a lot of different companies in a lot of different sectors. So let's jump in more to some of the pitfalls that you want to help other founders and CEOs avoid in their own growth journey. I was checking out this article that you had written a while back, and the first one that you mentioned was thinking that we had to move faster than we did. Tell us a little bit about this and the lessons learned over the years.
Well, I'm a big fan of contrarian, sort of counsel and advice. And so you get lots of this like move fast and break things, blah, blah, blah. But what I found when we were getting started, and we had some pretty lean years to get going. We spent 3.5 years in my parents' basement kind of getting things going. And, and if you're an entrepreneur at heart, sometimes you have a lot of ideas and there's a lot of different directions you might go in. And fear is kind of like a major, sort of motivator, right? Like you're concerned about getting crushed or what have you. So the point is, I was always fearful we were moving too slowly. I was always fearful the bad guys were going to get us or whatever it was. But to some extent, when you're that size, you are inherently going to be moving faster. And if you run in every direction at the same time, it's not so good. And so I think just being focused and disciplined and knowing where you're going and pushing there as fast as you reasonably can, but not so fast that you're becoming counterproductive, I think is that kind of balance. That's what I was trying to hint at.
Yeah. And that reminds me of one of our quotes or a quote that we come back to as a team a lot as a fast scaling startup ourselves. And our founder and CEO is just an idea guy. James just has ideas coming out his ears all the time. And we come back to this quote from the 4 disciplines of execution. And I might not get it word for word, but there will always be an excess of great ideas than there is enough time to execute on them. And so you have to learn to be selective. And I like what you said, know that when you are smaller, you're going to be naturally moving pretty fast anyway. So don't let that fear kind of creep up on you. Now, you guys are all about the numbers, being an accounting software platform yourself. But one of the mistakes that you mentioned, you wanted other founders to avoid, that you kind of fell into a bit, is placing too much faith in a spreadsheet. Tell us what you meant by that.
Yeah. So first off, I am a big fan of spreadsheets and using them to forward plan your business. And the benefit is not having the spreadsheet. The benefit is the exercise and the scenario planning and the development of sort of assumptions and predictions on which you build your business. Okay. And so I'm a big fan of building a model on the revenue side and the cost side that looks forward and just understanding how all that stuff works. And it can be very simple. In most people's businesses, it can just be very simple. We have really complex stuff now at FreshBooks, but at the get-go, it can be very, very simple. And so with that in mind, the thing that's true, and it's true like now we operate a company, it's, I don't know, 400 people, places everywhere. Like, as the fun fact our CFO shared with me and kind of captures the same sentiment, is the minute you ship a budget for the next year, it's out of date. It's stale, right? It's like your best guess at the time and you move on. And so, I think the thing about a spreadsheet is it can very much be the same way. And so I think it's very important to do the exercise. But you may just find the assumptions you put in your models, whether they be revenue or expenses, were like maybe a very predictable expenses, but your revenues are hard to imagine. Like, you may end up getting to the same number, but not the same way you thought you would. And so I think the exercise and the discipline, very important. Just sort of don't believe it's going to be exactly how you thought it was.
I love that, Mike. We have definitely seen that in the last 2 years I've been here on the Sweetfish team, where we've gotten to the number, but the components there shifted greatly. We were off in the details, but we ended up getting to the same place. So I can definitely attest to that from personal experience. Awesome. So number 3 that you had here was thinking we had to spend more than we did. And I really relate to this because at Sweetfish, we're a 5-year-old company now. And really the way I describe it is we did a lot on the brand side. I mean, we're almost into 1,300 episodes in this podcast, and it has just been straight brand awareness. And for the last 2 years, I've kind of been owning sales. And we really haven't had that middle gap of sophisticated demand gen for ourselves. And so, but yet we've built a business that is on track to hit the Inc. 5000 this year, possibly the Inc. 500, if we get to where we're planning. So budgets being out of date is on my mind as well. And so I just look at that and I'm like, well, we've done a lot without a complete kind of sales and marketing typical function and funnel. So tell us a little bit about maybe what is similar or different, or kind of similar but different in your own story there.
Yeah, a couple things. I think, first of all, most businesses have 1 or 2 channels where they end up, generating most of their business, right? And so, when you build the plan, you say, well, we're going to use 7 channels and what have you. And that's, probably not the way to do it. And the costs obviously expand considerably. Better to probably pick, 1 or 2 when you're getting going, scale them up, and then work on others. I think the other thing is when you sit with the spreadsheet, there's just a false comfort that comes with spending money that is, like the more I spend, the more confident I am. When in reality, it's probably like the more dollars you spend, the less confident you should be in every incremental dollar. And I think that's really the heart of this thing is, hey, if you know how spending $100,000 went last year and you're going to spend $150,000, and you're probably doing pretty good. But if you jump that up to $500,000, it's probably not going to go like you think, is thing one. And so you probably get marginally less effective on all those incremental dollars. And so you can probably get, sort of superior results by, kind of staying a little leaner and closer to what and kind of building on it incrementally. And so anyways, I think some of those things in and around there are what that's trying to sort of get at.
Yeah, that's a really great thing to keep in mind that, when we make those big jumps in the spend, whether that's marketing, sales, whatever it is that's going into the growth of the business, take a little bit smaller steps and you're going to be more efficient with those dollars. I mean, it's kind of like on the personal finance side, you're amazed with what you can do when you're on a tighter budget and you really get scrappy. And then when, those times of feast rather than famine, it's like, wait, hold on a second. Where did all that go? Right? Same sort of thing on the business side. Number 4 on your list of pitfalls to avoid to not kill your business while you're in the midst of growing is placing too much faith in consultants. Talk about your own experience there, maybe without, naming names or throwing anyone under the bus, but just the general lessons learned, right?
I think for me, like I'd never worked anywhere else when we started this thing out. And so I hadn't gone and worked in a company. I didn't know how that worked. And then, you meet some smart people that maybe worked at like McKinsey or something like this, and you're getting some counsel for them. Or maybe it's an advisor who, comes from a different industry and doesn't know yours and what have you. I was desperate for, knowing what to do. And I didn't know. And I kind of knew that I didn't know. And I felt at times I would start to be like, oh, like, I'm really going to put my faith in what this other person says, because clearly they're business smarter than me. And, they're talking about frameworks and leverage and, whatever. I almost, it's almost back to the Buffett thing. It's like, invest in what you understand. But I basically, like, they seemed like this source of confidence and knowledge. And I knew I didn't have that because I was just trying to figure everything out at once. And at the end of the day, most of the time I backed away from taking their advice. And I kind of went with whatever I thought I should do. But it was a very attractive prospect to just trust what they knew. But at the end of the day, mostly, your customer, your market, your product, and you're better off seeking your own counsel. So I like to be a big fan of like collecting input, but seeking my own counsel. And so I'll ask lots of folks and they'll be like, oh, you didn't do what I said, or you didn't agree with me, or you still did the same thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, I got your input and it didn't change any of my assumptions. I mean, maybe a little deeper in understanding why I liked them, but they didn't change them. Other times, like, I changed my mind completely, and reserve the right to do that. But yeah, I think you need to seek your own counsel at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of that is recognizing your own personality style. One of the things on our team we've looked at as a leadership team and throughout our team at Sweetfish is the Enneagram personality types. Other folks are, very into Myers-Briggs or whatever, but no matter what kind of system or profile that you tend to look at, there are certain personality types that are like, okay, when I hear this advice, okay, that's gospel. I hear this, that's gospel. But, if you are an ambitious founder and you have ideas and you've been digging into the problem, then your gut is probably telling you, take that advice, but take it with a grain of salt. And at times it may just completely push you back to the way that you're thinking anyway. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's still good that came from that input, right?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and say I will take the gut of somebody who's been mucking about in a problem over the, sort of intelligence and business acumen of the professional any day.
I love that, Mike. So well said. So the other thing on your list was underestimating word of mouth in the early days. And that's something that you guys have kind of changed your approach, or at least your thinking around these days. Tell us about that switch that happened for you.
Well, I think, to be honest, I think we caught this flame pretty quickly. And it's why we're in business today and been as successful as we were. We spent a lot of time on word of mouth. So yes, we paid for advertising, and we still do, but we would also, when we went to a conference where our customers were, we spent a lot of time around like, hey, how do we get everybody thinking or talking about us when they leave, right? And what are the knock-on effects of that? And so, what I would say is, hey, every business probably ought to start, instead of going mass, to go very niche or very segmented in their approach. And then as soon as you go and do that and make that niche like almost as small as you possibly can, if you go do a good job and you build real relationships with people and you do interesting things that compel people to talk about you because you're relevant and interesting to them and their small community, that will lead to a lot of things. Sometimes it leads to media. People want to write about you. Sometimes it leads to, random blog posts, which is pretty much the same thing. So sort of earned media. And so there's the word of mouth of getting to them and having the real relationships. And then there's the knock-on effects from doing that. And, I've got a whole analogy for it, but I'll spare you and your audience. I think you get the idea.
I love it. I love your emphasis on relationships. Our founder's recent book, Content-Based Networking, is all about, how nothing good happens in life or business without relationships. You can map it either with a direct line or maybe a little bit of a squiggly line, but those relationships. And the other thing that you mentioned was going niche early. I mean, we interact with so many marketing agencies that are partners of ours and that sort of stuff. And we've seen those that really find their niche and go all in there, they might expand or that might shift. But those that try to be everything to all people just inevitably struggle. And that kind of leads us to point number 6 that you mentioned, that in the early days, you kind of had this fear that you couldn't get far enough or you couldn't get far enough fast enough without doing X, either taking that investment money or signing that deal or signing up that partner. But what a lot of people don't realize is that getting that thing, even though if that thing seems like the right thing, if there are things about it where you're kind of shoving a square peg into a round hole, it could actually take you backwards more than accelerate you those 3 steps. So saying no can actually help you move forward, right?
I do not disagree.
All right, Mike, number 7 on your list was about doubting yourselves too much. And I think that, we've kind of encountered this before in our own journey, thinking about, okay, we've assembled teams and processes for producing podcasts and growing audiences, but it's not necessarily rocket science. I mean, there are things that other people have figured out and expertise that other people have, but we've had to stop and say, well, look how long it took us to kind of hone this process and whittle these things down and really get it humming. Did you guys kind of have that same sort of evolution, kind of realizing your own expertise and removing some of that doubt of the expertise that you guys were gaining in the product you were developing and the customers that you were solving and the problems that you were helping them tackle?
Yeah, I think there's this, if you're really in a startup, and it's sort of not well funded in a new area and you're like pioneering and all this stuff, there's just this overwhelming uncertainty on like every vector. Like, are we going to make it? How fast should we go? Will that deal close? Like, I mean, it's just, there's so many variables, and I think what comes out of that is, especially if you haven't kind of done it before, can be, and I was making all this stuff up, doing everything from first principles for the first time. Like, that's a lot. And so it was just like, kind of overwhelming fear and uncertainty and doubt. And so, yes, over time, it seemed like, oh, actually, we were kind of early, and we were like years early, which ended up proving to be very helpful. So once we kind of caught our breath and realized that, we had more confidence, we keep going, which are the kinds of things you're hinting at. And yeah, so I think that the emotion of it all can get you to a very irrational place. And I think it's important to have people who are either outside of your outfit or whatever it is, to kind of recalibrate yourself to, what's what. And so, for me, it was a lot of advisors and things like that I needed, but because I was just running out of fear for and to boil it down for so long. And it kept me sharp and paranoid. And, I learned a lot and explored a lot of ideas, but it was, I think at the same time, I probably could have smelled a few more roses, probably could have made a few moves that were less counterproductive and reactionary. And, all of that would probably help, sort of us ultimately get there faster.
I love it. Just to wrap things up for folks, we talked about 7 pitfalls to avoid while you are scaling up your company. Don't think that you have to move faster all the time. Don't place too much faith in a spreadsheet. You've still got to know what's going on within the business. Take that process. I like what you said there, the exercise of putting that budget together, of putting those models together. It is as important as what the data actually says. As we see with things going on, models change, things change very quickly at times in life, and especially in scaling a startup. Don't always think you need to spend more than you do. Think about incremental increases so that you're more efficient with that budget. Avoid the trap of placing too much faith in consultants. And then the last 3 were, don't underestimate word of mouth. Don't always believe that next thing that seems like the right move is definitely the one. And then just don't forget to look at where are you running out of fear or doubt, and recognize that for what it is and kind of pivot from there. Mike, anything else that you want to share with listeners today on this topic of the pitfalls to avoid as you're scaling up, and the lessons that you've learned along the way as you guys have been on a great trajectory at FreshBooks?
I guess what I would say is the thing that's not on the list, because it's not one of the ways we almost killed it, just don't give up.
I love it. I love it, Mike. Well, for listeners, if you've really enjoyed this episode, another one that was a very similar conversation, episode 923, 3 leadership lessons from bootstrapping to 150 million with Tomas Gorny over at Nextiva, is definitely one that you want to check out. Check that out in the show notes. Speaking of next steps, Mike, if anybody listening to this would like to reach out to you, ask any questions, or stay connected with you and the FreshBooks team, what's the best way for them to take next steps there?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One is, if you want to get me at Mike McDerment on Twitter, by all means, check out FreshBooks. And if you're looking for something to bill your clients and manage your books, free trials can be had at freshbooks.com. And, I think with that, we're off to a pretty good start. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you for being a fantastic guest on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Logan.
I hate it when podcasts incessantly ask their listeners for reviews, but I get why they do it. because reviews are enormously helpful when you're trying to grow a podcast audience. So here's what we decided to do. If you leave a review for B2B Growth in Apple Podcasts and email me a screenshot of the review to james@sweetfishmedia.com, I'll send you a signed copy of my new book, Content-Based Networking, How to Instantly Connect with Anyone You Want to Know. We get a review, you get a free book. We both win.